Today's ancient witness comes from the book of Luke, chapter 13, verses 31 through 35. Just then some Pharisees came to Jesus and said, "You need to get out of town and fast. Herod is trying to kill you." Jesus replied, "Go tell that fox, today and tomorrow I'll be casting out devils and healing people, and on the third day I'll reach my goal. Even with all that, I'll need to continue my journey today, tomorrow, and the day after that, since no prophet can be allowed to die anywhere except in Jerusalem." Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you kill the prophets and stone those who are sent to you. How often have I wanted to gather your children together as a mother bird collects her babies under her wings, yet you refuse me. So take note, your house will be left to you desolate. I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, "Blessed is the one who comes in the name of our God."
Thank you, Bill. When I was little, I used to hate watching scary movies. Well, hate is such a strong word. How about this? I used to feel really uncomfortable about being subjected to scary movies. Growing up, my dad and my sister would play scary movies like Halloween or Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street. Maybe you've seen those, maybe not. I tried to participate, I tried to watch, but they are a part of the scary movie genre, and I know that a scary part will happen. And inevitably, the moment the situation got scary, like, I don't know, say the moment the signature scary music started playing, or the moment a man started turning into a giant green hulky monster, well, that was it for me. And I would immediately run and jump into my mother's arms. My heart would be pounding, and she would embrace me and hold me. I mean, really hold me, like rock me back and forth sometimes as if I were in a cradle. And there I would feel safe. Of course, I would peek out, wanting to know if the danger was over. "Is it safe?" I would ask. She would smile and say, "Not yet, Michael." I think she enjoyed that too, perhaps. And looking back, I think maybe it was not so much feeling scared, but being vulnerable, as if I was going to be attacked by the monster in the television, that the monster was actually going to come out of the monitor and into the room. There was always a danger lurking with these movies. And maybe you felt that way too as a child, and maybe even as a parent, that feeling of being safe or providing safety. I think I can safely say that a mother's arms are the best refuge for a child. There's such a sense of calming and tenderness and love can be found there. In our gospel reading for the day, we are given a glimpse into the inner life of Jesus at a time when the powers of the day are beginning to lurk about for troublemakers. And Jesus has been making progress in his ministry, and we know that whenever there is progress, there is always going to be pushback. The Roman Empire had dominated the Jewish landscape over the years and had formed relationships with local leaders. And while some of the leaders saw no way of getting around the empire, there were some that made the most of their power and so exploited others for advancement. And yes, there were even some who thought that God was just not powerful enough to overcome the likes of Rome. So many of the leadership had made alliances with each other and other powerful forces across the landscape. There were a lot of people of power in Jerusalem. And one particular group, the Pharisees, were highly educated and had tremendous power and authority. They did not exactly see eye to eye with Jesus on most things, but this particular contingent, perhaps a more kind and gentler contingent than the whole, sought to protect Jesus in an act of compassion. And so, as we pick up the story, they huddle around Jesus and so warn him to get out of town. And of course, underneath the surface of all this is Herod's displeasure and unease with anything that upsets the power dynamics under his rule. He is leaning hard on political alliances, and by this point, Herod is determined to be done with Jesus once and for all. So this group of leaders says to Jesus, "We have power, we have connections with the empire, we're going to help you." "Better get out of here," they said. "Herod intends to hurt you real bad." And we would think that Jesus would just heed their advice and so get out of town, or maybe even just submit to Herod's reign and cease his ministry altogether. But Jesus doesn't seem to be concerned. "Tell Herod I'm not afraid of him. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, whether you like it or not. And right now, I'm busy helping people get to wholeness, and I'll go all the way to the capital if I have to." Jesus is so committed to his work of healing and restoring that he is in fact resolved to seeing it through. He has a heart as big as all creation, and he wasn't going to let Herod chase him away or cause his work to cease. Because he's come on behalf of all the people, to those on the hillside, to those who were injured, and to those in need, even the leaders too. And he's brought a particular way of love and being in the world that is redeeming for all of creation. And when I hear him speak these words so bold in their intention, I get such a strong sense of his resolve and his commitment that I find myself rethinking what it means to be safe. See, Jesus was resolved to be a minister of love and justice, to take on the role of the suffering servant for the world. He was at peace with the fact that an unavoidable trouble would be coming. And yet his words are the kind that come from someone who knows they are ultimately safe. And knowing that trouble is lurking, he is safe to be bold on his mission to heal and to liberate and to care for creation. He doesn't necessarily have safety in this world. I mean, after all, this can be a very unsafe place when programs intended to protect and promote people get cut and leave many vulnerable. or when people decide to stick up for their rights and in turn are assaulted or sent away. But the work of Christ is to make us safe. Jesus says, "How I wish that you would allow me to protect you as your mother would do against these foxes." And if you know anything about chickens, you know that the mother of her flock is really smart. Even the ancient Greek philosopher Plutarch was known to observe that with great care she governs and guards her chicks. There is no part of her body with which she does not wish to cherish them, he says. And when the mother senses danger like that of an approaching fox, she will intentionally place herself in between her children and the danger. She sort of circles around a little bit to find a nice spot to stand, and then hovers her wings open and calls for her vulnerable children to shelter inside. And one by one, they come inside her fold. They huddle in. Some will peek out, curious at the danger. Others, though, will stay tucked safely inside. She could choose to fight, but to do that would increase the chance that her children would perish. Instead, she gathers them in a show of compassion and concern for her children. Now, it is a very vulnerable position to be in indeed, but if you mean what you say, then this is how you stand. And that's who Jesus is, always turning things upside down so that children wind up on top while kings fall to the bottom, always wrecking our expectations of how things should turn out by giving prizes to those who lose and paying the last. And like a mother bird who is willing to sacrifice her own life to keep her children safe, Jesus responds to the threat of his own life by wishing that he could protect others even more. This is his resolve. This is his purpose. This is what gives him a sense of peace about the suffering he will inevitably endure. "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I have longed to gather your chicks under my wings," he says. And that's the kind of love Jesus tells these important authoritative leaders, the big love that God wants to share. Now, if you have ever loved someone you could not protect, then you understand the depth of the lament. All you can do is open your arms. You cannot, however, make anyone walk into them. And with open arms, Jesus never stops calling God's little ones to come in to God's big and sheltering love. The Herods of this world would like to lull us into a false sense of security and for us to feel comfortable with their sense of scarcity and their sense of safety. They would like us to join in lockstep with those that have the upper hand and to submit to their bigotry and hatred and exploitative ways instead of trusting that there is something bigger in this life, a spirit inside us that gives us so much resolve that we can be unafraid to speak truth to power, even if it's going to put our safety at risk. To protect the weak and the vulnerable and the voiceless when the foxes and the Herods of the world lurk about. Like a loving bird, God desires to shield and save her children from the powers of death and destruction. She longs to spread out her arms, her great wings sheltering all creation, all that God has made, caring for us with such joy and with such love. There is room enough for God's way of abundance and love and for a heart as big as creation. And that's the thing about abundance, about love. There is always more and always room for more. In his autobiography, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. talks about the events that occurred in Selma after their first attempt to march to Montgomery that was filled with awful police brutality and public violence. King described the painstaking spiritual and legal deliberations that he and his colleagues had while deciding what to do in order to stay committed to their cause of nonviolent action as protest. And just last month, we saw some of those efforts as we watched the movie Rustin. And as they gathered before setting out again to march to Montgomery almost 60 years ago to this day, King told those there, quote, "I say to you this afternoon that I would rather die on the highway of Alabama than make a butchery of my conscience. I say to you, when we march, don't panic, and remember that we must remain true to nonviolence. I'm asking everybody in the line, if you can't be nonviolent, don't get in here. If you can't accept blows without retaliating, don't get in the line. But if you can accept it out of your commitment to nonviolence, you will somehow do something for this nation that may well save it. If you can accept it, you will leave those state troopers bloodied with their own barbarities. And if you can accept it, you will do something that will transform this nation and conditions here in Alabama." Unquote. Martin Luther King Jr.'s words echo through today. These words, so full of surety and resolve, spoken by someone who knows the danger that will come from being committed to following that resolve. Someone who knows what it means to be safe with God, and someone who knows God's love and works towards peace and justice. In closing, I will say that Lent is about giving up a small piece of ourselves, intentionally making ourselves feel vulnerable in order to know God in a new way, to gain a larger piece of God. Lent can also be about gaining peace for our neighbors and for the greater good of the community. Therefore, beloveds, let us plant our feet firmly on the Lenten path, walking with God as our companion, walking through resistance and discomfort, but walking with God nonetheless. Thanks be to God. Amen.